COVID-19 accelerated the world's change more than ever. The world's power is changing from the United States and Europe to Asia and Africa, from the younger generation to the older generation, and the male to female.
So what's going to happen by the year 2030 is that we're going to be in a situation in which there will be more people in South Asia and in Africa than in any other part of the world. That's one thing. The second is that we're going to have more than 35% of the population above the age of 60. So we're going to be in a situation in which there's going to be more grandparents than grandchildren because of the population changes that we're seeing today. And also we're going to see that women hold, by that time, more than half of the world's wealth. So it's going to be a world in the year 2030 that, from the population point of view, looks very different from the world today. Because today, none of those things are true. But very quickly, it's only going to take 10 years. We're going to see in that very different situation.
The silver generation becomes a major consumer, and also the women as well. I wonder how the stock investment landscape will change in 2030 as well.
So I think we're going to see quite a bit of change from both sources. So one is, again, that we have more people above the age of 60 and they want their savings to last. And they care about the immediate future more so they're not willing to take as many risks. That's one thing. And then the other one is women, increasingly with money, and they also are more risk averse. So if you have more people who behave in a certain way that is different from in the past, the more people you have in that category, then the more that's going to have an impact on the markets. Then that's not just going to change women, it's going to change financial markets as well. By the year 2030, half of the wealth in the world will be owned by women. So what I think is going to happen is that we're going to see more diversification. And we already see that, meaning that today, as we speak, at least here in the United States, women tend to have more diversified portfolios. They invest in the entire market. They invest in an index, right, as opposed to buying individual stocks. It's very volatile. It can change very. We've seen that over the last 6 or 7 years. Because if you remember, 5 years ago, it was quite high, and then it lost 80% of its value within 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
And again, the price of Bitcoin is completely driven by demand. Right now, there's a lot of demand. But if in 6 months from now, some of those people think, oh, I've made money, I want to actually cash out. They start selling Bitcoin, then, the price is going to collapse, right? It's an asset, it's a coin, it's an investment that doesn't give you any dividends. And it doesn't have any intrinsic value like gold has. Because as you know, the supply is restricted, right? They don't produce as many or create as many Bitcoins as would be possible. So it all depends on the demand. And right now, of course, we see a lot of demand in the world. Why? Because as you know, interest rates are very low. Governments, especially here in the United States and in Europe, are printing money. So there's a lot of liquidity, right? There's a lot of money floating around, and people are looking for ways to invest that money. And one of them is Bitcoin. So the fact that now we have a lot of these investors, including Tesla, right, buying Bitcoin, then drives the price up.
The Korean government actually spent the astronomical amounts of budget for more than 10 years on low birth rate problem. But there's no improvement whatsoever with the astronomical amounts of budgets. Is it desirable to accept the decrease in population and find ways to keep the economic growth from a downsizing population? Or is there any groundbreaking measure to increase the birth rate?
First of all, I think it makes sense to have a birth rate that is about 2 children per woman. Because in that case, you are replacing the population, and therefore you're avoiding some of these big ups and downs in terms of the age structure of the population. But as you mentioned, Korea is slightly below 1 baby per woman, which is, of course, way less than the 2 baby replacement level. So now here's the problem. It's very difficult to persuade people to have more babies or to have fewer babies. it's extremely difficult because people make their decisions based on a very large number of factors. And right now, I think in South Korea, the biggest factor behind the decline in the number of babies is that women are pursuing their own careers. A few things that governments should do, if only in the spirit of equity, which is, for example, to provide couples, young couples who want to have children, with better conditions as to childcare, or perhaps with more vacation days when they have a child so that they can take care of the child. So anything that I think encourages people to see parenthood as something positive, as something that they can enjoy. The other big thing is motherhood. So if women want to have a baby, then of course, sometimes they have to stop working. Well, there should be formulas, especially now that we can do remote work, whereby women who want to have a baby can also work perhaps from the home. As you know, there are many different kinds of things that one can do. I mean, one of them, of course, is to ensure that when it comes to hiring, when it comes to promotions, that the criteria, the standards for judging men and women, for example, are the same, right? As opposed to imposing higher standards for women. And the other thing is to establish mentoring systems. As you know, especially for promotions, people prefer to have a mentor who is like themselves. So men prefer men, women prefer women. But of course, the problem is that we don't have enough women in very high positions, for example, at companies so far. So it's very important to also help with mentoring, help those women who are trying to pursue a career at companies to get promoted by mentoring them, by providing them with advice, and so on and so forth. Both of them can be used at the same time. So the first is to think about the population above age 60 or age 70 as a very important market, consumer market. And obviously, as you know, also people now stay in good physical and mental shape much longer than in the past. So it's also, I think it's important to encourage people who turn 65 or 70 to continue working, at least part-time. I think that's always good. And that will also contribute to economic growth. And of course, the second alternative here is immigration. So you can also rebalance the age structure of the population by bringing in immigrants who are relatively young. So I think, most countries in East Asia, in Europe, here in the United States, in Canada, will need to do both in the future.